Hello everyone. Today we'll be continuing with our Japanese basics lessons, and we're going to jump into three different ways of doing invitations. Up until now, we have focused just on the basic verb types and saying, hey, I do this or I don't do this, or I did this or I didn't do this. We've kept it fairly simple. But at one point, you probably are going to want to use your Japanese to start talking and actually interacting with people, saying, "Hey, let's do this," or "Would you like to do that?" And these are three, I'm going to call them verb endings that you can use to, do that. So let's go ahead and get started. The three that are on the screen, masenka, mashoka, masho, and mashoka, we'll go through each of these one at a time. And then we'll talk about how they differ from one another. So the first one we're going to start off with is masenka. This is the most polite. We'll talk about why. And it uses the present negative form that we already know. And so before we jump into using this, let's warm up and practice this. So I'm going to give you a verb, and anyone or any number of people can type out the answer. But if I say something like this, taberu, then I hope you would say, okay, what's the negative present? What's the negative present? Oh, it's tabemasen. And type that out. And it's not really a race to see who gets there first. It's as many people that want to type out the answer, get that extra practice in, you're free to do so. So let's just do a few verbs and then we will continue on. Okay? How about to talk? To talk, as in I don't talk, or I don't speak. And if someone else has typed out the answer and you say, oh, that's the answer, they beat me, I'm not going to type it, you know, I'd say just go ahead and type it out. Each action you take, it might be minor, but it's helping reinforce that Japanese in your head. And if you don't have Japanese installed, a keyboard installed on your computer and you're using Romaji, that's cool. We've got no problem with that whatsoever. Whatever works best for you. Okay. How about this? To go, iku. What's the I don't go or I will not go? Ikimasen, looking good. Okay. How about, hopefully this isn't something you have to use too often, but play. I don't play or I will not play. Asobimasen. Great. And last one. Let's take our special verb, suru. How would we use this one? Or how would we change it rather? Looking good. Excellent. Shimasen. Okay, so let's jump into this pattern. If you see, you'll probably guess, oh, we're using the negative present because that's used in the pattern, and it's true. It's basically the negative verb form, the masen, plus the question. And you might be thinking that's kind of a strange way to invite someone because aren't you inviting them to not do something? Are you asking them, are you not going to do this? But if you think about in English, we will say, won't you have dinner with me? Won't you go to the park? And compared to other ways of inviting people in English, shall we go to the park? Or let's go to the park. Using that negative, takes a bit of the edge off of it. It weakens it somewhat. And in that way, it becomes a bit more polite. In that, if you want to think of it a different way, how strong is this invitation? How much are you pushing them to say yes? This would be at the lowest level. You are inviting them, but you're making it such a weak, I don't mean that negatively, but such a weak invitation that you're using the negative form and you're asking a question. So, won't you go to the park? Won't you eat dinner tomorrow? Won't you study together with me? This is how it comes out in Japanese. And so let's look at a few examples. The nice thing is that nothing else in the sentence needs to change. And since invitations typically are dealing with the person that's in front of you or on the other side of the screen, you don't even need a subject marker to say, who is going to, do this or not do this. So you can say something like, would you like some tea? Or won't you have some tea? Ocha o nomimasen ka? And try saying that quietly to yourself. Don't turn the mics on, but just practice. Say it in your head if you're around other people, or if you're in a quiet room, try saying it. Ocha o nomimasen ka? And just like in Japanese, there's a bit of a rising intonation at the end, with our questions. Ocha o nomimasen ka? Because it's a yes/no question, essentially. And we do the same thing, in English. Do you want to go tomorrow? That tomorrow kind of picks up at the end. That's the same thing here. Let's look at a few more examples. 1時に昼ご飯を食べませんか? One more time. 1時に昼ご飯を食べませんか? Now, you'll see here that we're translating in English as, would you like to have lunch at 1? And, excuse me. Just a minute ago, I likened this to the won't you, the won't you pattern. Won't you have lunch at 1 o'clock tomorrow? Excuse me. Now, I use the won't you to kind of help you see why, we use the negative form here. But if we were translating this in English, we would probably say, would you? Would you like to do so-and-so? And of course, there's no like here in this sentence. But Japanese and English, more often than not, you cannot translate one-to-one. So you're looking for the same feeling between the two sentences. And this is the closest thing. Would you like to have lunch tomorrow at 1? Would you like to have lunch at 1? That's a really good fit for this expression. And one more. 図書館で本を読みませんか? 図書館で本を読みませんか? And by the way, you probably know this already, but you can always look at these words. You can move your mouse or tap the words to see, what's going on top of it. And so, would you like to read some books at the library? This would be a good way to do this. So we can keep it as simple as we want. If you want to ask someone, would you like to eat? A single word could suffice. But you can also add on as many particles as you like using the ones we've learned so far, to note, what you're going to eat or what time you would eat or where you would do it. So before we continue, let's practice this a bit. Pretend that you're talking to me, that we're, face to face, and you're inviting me to go do something. It can be anything. It can be things that, people would not normally do together. Like, would you like to write kanji? That's fine. It's just for the sake of practice. Whatever verbs that pop into your head, those are the verbs you should use. But go ahead and ask me. And I'm going to respond depending on how I feel about the question, yes or no. But be as serious or as silly as you want, and use that masenka to politely ask me if I'd like to do something. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Again, this is the practice portion where you can practice if you want, or you can stay quiet and you can watch everyone else practice. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with either or any choice. It's whatever works best for you. But if you do practice, it's getting that grammar more into your head. And if there's a mistake, I'll correct the mistake, but I'm not going to say, hey, look at that mistake. Everyone, look at that mistake. And look at the person that made that mistake. We don't do that. They're gentle corrections. You're not going to feel embarrassed if you make a mistake. We're all learners here. So I'm going to start off with the first person. They're asking me if I would like to run. No, thank you. Good question. Excellent question. But it's a bit too early for me to be running. Second person, 友達と映画を見ませんか? So it sounds like they're inviting some other friends, not just the speaker and myself, but some other friends as well. And yeah, I haven't seen a movie in a while, so that sounds nice. Someone else is making it a bit more complex using some grammar that we haven't quite gotten to in our beginner lessons, linking those verbs together. The last one, I think there might be a small spelling mistake. You might be going for ikimasenka. They might be playing off of maybe they're going for ikiru, which is to live. And live, I like the question, although it's not quite something you'd use in an invitation since it's not really an action, so to speak. But it's good to try, words out. There's a time in all of our learning paths that you might be in the middle of this right now to where you want everything to be perfect before you say it. And that's simply impossible. And it'll never be perfect. No matter how many years you study, it'll never be perfect. You'll still make mistakes. So the best thing is just to say it. And if you're like me, those times when the listener kind of looks at you funny, then you remember that and you say, oh, that was a mistake. And you can use that to get better. Okay, I'm going to read a few more and we're going to keep going. Niwa ni arukimasen ka? Sure, I like gardens. You could also do, for that one person, you could also do niwa de. Niwa ni arukimasen ka sounds like we're walking to the garden, as in we're not there yet. But if you want to walk, in the garden, you could say niwa de arukimasen ka? So, but thank you. I couldn't read all of them, sorry. But thank you so much for all the examples. It's nice to see everyone trying. Let's continue. So, that's all there is to this first one. We're going to look at the next two, and then we're going to kind of see how we can compare them to the person asking. Yes, yours is fine. Yours is great. So, let's look at these next two. Now, these might start to get jumbled in your head, but don't worry, we're going to separate them out. Right now, we're kind of focusing more on how you make them. These next two are not quite as formal, not quite as polite. They're still polite, but in order of formality of politeness, they're a step down. And we're going to learn them together because they're almost exactly the same. They're the two endings masho and mashoka. Masho and mashoka. And the way you make this, a lot of these forms we've been working on takes something we already know and adds something to it or changes it ever so slightly. And these are no different. With these, if you take the mas form, you can almost kind of see this. You take the su and you're dropping that out and replacing it with sho. Now, this is something that for beginners, it's really hard to pick up on this until you get more used to it. Be careful that yo right next to it, it's the small yo. It looks pretty big, but it is the small one. Some people, depending on, the font that they use, or the teacher that they have, they might have you write the yo even smaller, towards kind of half height of the regular sized hiragana, but it can get pretty big. However, it is not at the full height, so we know it's a small one. How small it is does change. And to the person with the question, I'll answer that at the end of this, but I'd be happy to answer it. So let's take a look at these two. Real fast, as some examples, we had, before we had hanasu, to speak. So this one, let's think about the mas form. It's hanashimasu. So, hanashimashou. You can see that su, or rather the mas, is changing to mashou. And just if you're wondering, if you are still having a hard time working on those long vowels, listen carefully. Listen carefully to me say. I'm going to say the normal one, the one that's on the screen, and then I'm going to shorten it next. So this first one is hanashimashou. The second one is, the short one would be hanashimashou. If I say just the last part, the long one is shou. The short one is shou. Not only are the links different between the two, but you'll hear usually with the shorter one, it almost sounds like it just gets cut off. It's I was going to say more, but the audio just cut off at the end of it. It's a bit more of an abrupt end, where your longer vowels sound like they don't kind of cut off quite as much. They kind of taper off a bit more gracefully. But it's one of those things that you might think that there's no way I can get that. They sound exactly the same. Show, what? No, it's not going to work. I promise you, it's just an acclimation issue. It's not whether you're smart enough to understand it or not. It's just your ears need time to hear both of them enough. In the same way that when you first start drinking green tea, all green tea tastes the same. And you say, this one's no different from the other bottle that has a completely different label. But as you get acclimated to the tastes, you start to hear, or in this case, taste the differences. And this is no different. So let's do a few more. Let's say you want to make something. So we use the tsukuru, tsukurimasu, tsukurimashou. Or how about you're doing something, you're enjoying something, and it's time to finish. So it's like let's finish things. So owaru, owarimasu, owarimashou. Or if we're using our generic do verb, maybe we're saying let's study. So we have benkyou suru, benkyou shimasu, benkyou shimashou. So there's not a huge change here. It's not a big change. Now, depending on the formality, you can add a question mark, or not question mark, the question particle ka onto the end. Don't worry about the difference between those two right now. We're going to kind of list them all out together towards the end of the lesson. Okay? So again, instead of mas, masen, we're using mashou. So if you're not in Japan, you're somewhere where it's much warmer than it is here, and you're saying, hey, let's swim, or shall we swim? We would say something like oyogimashou, or oyogimashou ka. Now you can see, let's talk about the changes a little, or the differences a little bit. You can see that they are slightly different. And the big thing is the question. So which one, let me ask you, which one sounds stronger to you? Which one is a more forceful invitation? Is it the question one? Put Q if you think it's that, or if it's the not question, NQ. So which one do you think? The question form or the not question form? Which one's stronger? Yeah, you got it. I mean, if you give a statement, it's kind of like you're not expecting them to answer yes or no. You're expecting them just to go along with you. And this is the same way. So if you say oyogi masho, there's, I mean, of course they could say no. They can say no to anything. But the expectation is that they're going to say yes. The expectation is that they're going to say yes. Whereas oyogi mashoka, it's still stronger than the one we used before, but you're still giving them a bit of space to say no. You're still kind of thinking, yeah, they're going to say yes, but give them some space. You're not pushing them quite as much. So let's look at a few more. Tennisをしましょう. Let's play tennis. Or if you want to add some time to it, you could say something like 3時に行きましょうか? Now, I have a question. Do you see anything odd with the sentence that maybe you're thinking, I think there's something wrong in the sentence, but I don't want to correct Michael during the lesson? Is there anything in that sentence that makes you feel that way? There's probably something, a very small something that might make a little question mark appear above your head, and you're thinking, is that really what it should be? And yes, the person that answered the period instead of the question mark. Question marks are not explicitly required in Japanese. You do see them come up, but they're not required as in the question mark's not here, you're going to get marked off on it in your Japanese class. The ka does a sufficient job of saying, hey, this is a question. And so there's no need for the actual question mark. Can you put a question mark? Yes, you can. But it's not required. Okay. Now, up until now, we've been talking about, a joint action, and you're inviting the other person. So we said, hey, would you like, or shall we go at 3 o'clock? Or let's eat, or would you like to swim? And these are all things that, the speaker and the listener are going to do together, generally speaking. However, you can also use this when you're speaking about your own actions. And in this sense, I'm going to try and wedge it into what we've been talking about. It's an invitation for you to do something. In other words, would you like me to do this? So here, with this sentence, 写真を撮りましょうか? We're saying, 写真を撮る, take a picture. Now, it could be, depending on the context, it could be, hey, shall we take a picture together? But this is something that if you're ever in Japan, feel free to use. This isn't a Western thing. I see Japanese people do it, maybe not as often, but still I see it, where you see a family trying to take a picture, a selfie of themselves in front of some beautiful backdrop. But what they'd prefer to have someone else take it, but they're not going to ask necessarily. And so you can walk up to them and say, 写真を撮りましょうか? And this is a spot on, perfect way of saying, hey, would you like me to take a picture? And then in parentheses, for you or of you. So this is definitely one you can stick in your pocket and use, right off the boat or right off the plane if you are visiting Japan. So you can either use this to invite the other person to do something with you, or you can use this to offer your assistance, offer your help in some situation. And that's kind of it. That's the entire lesson. So we're not going to end it here. We're going to do some practice. We're going to do some comparison and contrasting. First, I would like to practice this a little bit. Then we're going to recap, look at all three of them together, and kind of give you a bird's eye view of what we've been doing. Now, before I was having you just invite me to do, whatever. But let's put a theme on it. Let's focus in on it a little bit, and let's talk about Japan. And let's talk about traveling. So let's talk about a trip in Japan. And let's say we're together, but we're friends and we don't necessarily have all of our days planned out. So let's think about things that we can ask one another or ask me. Would you like to do this? Or let's do that. But let's focus on things you might do in Japan. So I'm going to start. And I might say this. Sushi o tabemashou ka? Would you like to eat sushi? That's a good thing for Japan. Of course, I could have also done sushi o tabemashou. And you're free to use whichever one you'd like. But let's think about some actions in Japan. And I'll give you some hints, some verbs you might be using. You might be talking about eating something. There's some good things in Japan to drink. There's something you might want to see. Of course, there's a place you might want to go to. If you're into karaoke, you might be looking to sing a bit. And of course, how can you go to Japan without buying some of the crazy stuff they sell in Japan? So, buy as well. Miru is an ichidan verb, which means you just drop that ru off the end and then add the conjugation. So, mimashou ka? It's a common mistake. I mean, it's probably one of the most common mistakes. And it's something you just make the mistake one time, two times, 100 times, and then one day it switches over and you stop making it. I'm definitely not drinking shochu. I've had it before. It was not delicious at all. I know people that like shochu, which is a very hard liquor in Japan, but it wasn't for me. Someone else is saying, hey, would you like to go to the temple or the shrine? And I'm going to reply to one person just for people that it's a slightly different or slightly more difficult verb. It's actually a combo verb, which we'll learn about later. But they said mini ikimashou ka. You're actually taking two verbs, which is go or to see and to go. So it's like to go to see or to go see. And we'll get to that later, but it's a cool way of linking linking things together. Other people are talking about buying things at convenience stores. Someone apparently believes that Pokemon run free in Japan, which my son dearly wishes was the case. Unfortunately, it's not. Manga is spelled a bit more simply. And don't forget when you're using that particle to mark what you're doing, like what you're buying, whenever you type it, they're pronounced the same. But whenever you type it, you're going to want to use that WO. As in, whoa, I have to type this out. Okay, let's practice just a little bit more. I'm going to change the situation a bit. Up until now, we've done invitation style. You know, would you like to do this? Let's do that. Let's do that last usage that we talked about. The shall I do this for you? Or would you like me to do this? So this almost feels like it's true. The rest of my family is or has been sick, and somehow I think I've avoided it, but I feel like it could leap on me any day. But let's pretend I'm sick. Let's pretend I've got a cold and you're a family member. You know, we're living in the same house and I'm just dead. I'm just blah. And what are some things that you might say, would you like me to do this for you? You know, to help me because I'm sick. You might be talking about making something, cooking something. Again, I might need you to go buy something for me. I might be so dead that I can't even turn the TV on. So you might offer to do that. Someone so kindly said, would you like or shall I buy some medicine? Which would be great. Thank you. I definitely don't have the energy to clean. So if you could clean for me, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And yes, going shopping for me would be great. Now, don't forget, this is a beginner's lesson. So if you put kanji in, that's fine. But please fill in the hiragana, like one line below. That way, everyone can take advantage of the sentences, regardless of how they're written. And soup is great. Who doesn't like soup when they're sick? Unless it's more of the ramen. I guess you can call ramen soup. And that might be a bit heavy if you're sick. Matcha. Matcha is an interesting thing for two reasons. When you write matcha, it's actually, if you type it, you would type it like this with two C's. It's not matcha, it's matcha. And then when you're brewing something, like you're brewing tea or you're brewing coffee, you use this verb. Now it means other things, but in this case, it's to brew. So you might say, something like this: Matcha iremashou ka? And for the person talking about soup, if depending on the keyboard you're using, if you're on mobile or on desktop, usually if you're on mobile and you type it in with the dash, that will be enough for it to say, oh, hey, this is what they're trying to talk about. And they'll offer the katakana to you. If you're on the desktop, you have, a standalone keyboard and it's not giving you what you want, or it's convinced that it's not katakana, but you want to make it katakana, F7 is your friend. The F7 key will force it into katakana. Mofu, blanket. If we were talking about blankets, it's probably like, would you like me to get out a blanket? Or would you like me to put a blanket on you, over you? And so if you want to take out a blanket, it would be this. If you wanted to say, hey, would you like me to put it on you? It would probably be get it. But these are excellent suggestions, everyone. It's a much wider range of answers than I had in my head. So that's good. Now, let's circle back around and talk about all three of them together. And I'm going to, since someone was talking about blankets, I'm going to use that, although this might not be the most effective example for the three different politeness types, but let's use it. If you'll give me 1 second, let me type them out real fast. Actually, excuse me, let me you've possibly seen the movie. It's a very old movie. Nowadays it is Shall We Dance? And Shall We Dance definitely is the top version. So here's our three that we've learned today using a single verb, odoru, which is to dance. And here from the top going down, we're going from most polite, which in a sense also means least imposing, least forceful is at the top. Going down, it brings us to still polite. These are all polite. None of these are rough or I shouldn't use these in a polite situation. They're all polite, but they're a smidge less polite, ever so slightly, because they're a bit more forceful. So you're going from weak at the top to stronger at the bottom. You're going from more formal at the top to less formal, but you're still okay. You're still fine at the bottom. Odorimasen ka? Wouldn't you like to dance? Shall we dance? Odorimashou ka? Would you like to dance? Shall we dance? You know, they're very similar, but just a bit stronger. And then odorimashou. Let's dance. And this isn't part of this lesson, but just some of you might be wondering, there is one more version that it usually comes up in N4. So a bit, I think it's N4, a bit more pre-intermediate level, but there is one more step down. And this one is the casual form. Odoro. And this is the casual invitation. We're not learning today, but just for the sake of completion, I wanted to toss it out there. So that's what we have today. Odorimasen ka, odorimashou ka, odorimashou. Going weaker to stronger, going from most formal to least formal, but all still polite. Now, one person, I'm actually glad that they're making mistakes with their Ichidan and Godan verbs because I wanted to point something out in Renshu real fast. I hope you're all enjoying the updates that we've made in Renshu. I still have a bunch of small fixes, but one of the biggest things that we added that it's not right in front of your face, so you might not have seen it yet, is this. If you're looking at the screen share, I'll go ahead and show you. In the dashboard, now of course Kaochan running, that's the best part of the update. I love it. But down here underneath your mastery schedules, I have a bunch because I'm testing it usually. If you go into your manage your schedule section, it shows you not only everything you have, it lets you delete things if you don't want them. There's also all schedules, which is all the pre-made schedules that we have. And most of these were already in here before. They look a bit nicer. But down here, this is brand new. There's a verb and adjective conjugation section. And I have them added, so they're already a dark green. But if you don't have them, you can push them to add these to your dashboard. These are conjugation only schedules. There are no sentences. There's no other grammar. It's just focusing on that spelling. And all it's doing is it's focusing on, it's tossing verbs at you. And it's like, hey, conjugate this. Or, hey, here's the conjugated version, bring it back. Or which version is this? And a lot of people have been looking for that. So if you need that, this is exactly what you need. And then once you have it, it'll prompt you to, whoops. It's got a whole bunch of conjugations, and you can just choose the ones you want to focus on. And the cool thing about this is that for each one, let's say we're dealing with the mas form, it actually separates out each one. So your mastery level is not on the mas form, it's on the mas form for godan verbs that end in u, or godan verbs that end in ku. So if you've got most of those down, but for example, those ru verbs, you just can't get those. Those will stay in circulation. So you can focus on those the most. So definitely check this out if you'd like. I hope it helps. Now, before we end things, today was a slightly shorter lesson. Are there any questions about these invitation things? Someone did ask about masho and desho, which is a bit outside of this lesson, so I'll answer it once we're done with this lesson. Any questions about masenka, mashoka, masho? Okay, I don't see anyone typing, so I think we're good. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this will be available inside of Renshu. This also is brand new, so let me show it to you. If you go into resources and then Japanese lessons, it used to be called Japanese Basics, but it's no longer basics. So we have Japanese lessons. Down here, all these links, these are the ones we've already done. And as you know, we do about one a week. So the invitations one will appear here. You can go back and check these out whenever you want, take your time and, reference that. So I hope it helps. Thank you so much.